Good morning to Davos. I feel very privileged of having the opportunity to introduce a remarkable group of panelists this morning, and I'll just do it in the way we're sitting here. On my left is Lesia Vasilenko, who has been a member of the Ukrainian parliament. So welcome. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning.
Then we have the foreign minister of Sweden, Tobias Billström. Welcome to you, sir. It's a great privilege to have you here. And last but certainly not least, Nataliya Gumenyuk. Am I pronouncing it correctly?
Absolutely.
Who is a extremely well-known political journalist, an activist, associated especially with the so-called Reckoning Project, which I'm sure some of you are familiar with. So good morning to everybody. And we're talking about towards a fair global order, and how can this done without Ukraine? It certainly cannot be done without Ukraine. So how can we produce a fair global order with Ukraine? I think that is the question we're going to be discussing for the next... How much time do we have?
1 hour, 50 minutes.
Okay. Maybe, if you agree, I'll ask the foreign minister of Sweden to get us kicked off by making some remarks about the Swedish approach and the Swedish philosophy about this, and then we'll take it from there. Okay?
Thank you, Wolfgang. Thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be here today. I'm very glad, ladies and gentlemen, to be here among so many distinguished colleagues. Let's just start by stating the obvious. We live in a new, very dangerous reality, and that is one where the free world and the rules-based international order is under threat. And it is under pressure from those who want an order where might makes right. He who is strong survives. And we must resist this by supporting Ukraine and by putting pressure on Russia. And this is, of course, in solidarity with Ukraine, but it is also, which I constantly refer to, because of our own safety, the rest of us. Ukraine continues, of course, to show a remarkable, impressive resistance in every way, denying Russians the gains, the front lines, pushing back the Russian Navy in the Black Sea, and in doing so, Ukraine is preventing a situation where Russia, but also other states in the world, could conclude that aggression pays off. And to be able to do so, Ukraine needs our support. That's to stating the obvious. That will be costly, but the alternative of not doing so would be even more costly. So now is not the time to back down, but rather to step up. We, the free world, needs to be predictable in our long-term support to Ukraine. And the security commitments to Ukraine, well, they are being elaborated by us and also by partners. And that is very important. At the EU level, we now have a historic decision in December to grant Ukraine candidate status. We are supporting the long-term financing through the Ukraine facility and the European Peace Facility. Bilaterally, from Sweden, we have adopted the largest Swedish development cooperation strategy to one single country ever, supporting Ukraine's reconstruction and EU integration, and building on the reform cooperation that Sweden and Ukraine has enjoyed since the 1990s. So this is not something new in itself. We will continue to push further and to adjust the tools at our disposal. We are reforming the Swedish development cooperation to the reality we are facing today. And a key of this is also that this is now becoming an integrated part of Sweden's foreign policy. I keep saying that there is nothing more important for Swedish foreign policy than Ukraine on every level. And that is completely true, because this is, as I said, about freedom, the rules-based international order, all the fundaments which we believe in Sweden when we speak about foreign policy. Finally, also, when Russia launched its illegal invasion on Ukraine, a full-scale invasion, the international community rallied to the support of Ukraine. in the UN General Assembly, an overwhelming majority of countries voted in favor of Ukraine and the right to sovereignty and territorial integrity in line with the UN Charter. What we now have to do, apart from military support and humanitarian support and economical support, is also political support, which is equally important. We must ensure to maintain and strengthen this unity. And I welcome very much the recent National Security Advisors meeting here in Davos regarding Ukraine's peace formula. Incidentally, the only credible peace formula that has been presented so far during this war. And it is impressive also to see the nations who has gathered here in Davos. And we call on all international partners to engage in this very crucial process. So promoting a comprehensive, just, a lasting peace based on international law in Ukraine, that will require the broadest possible support that we can muster in order to achieve this. And this is vital, not only for Ukraine and its people, but also for the international community as a whole. So I'm very happy for having been invited here today. Thank you very much for leaving me the floor.
Thanks, Tobias. That's a great introduction to our discussion, I think. Let me turn next to Nataliya. We've had floating around discussions, proposals, suggestions about a negotiating process. And you've just written a very impressive piece about how we should think about hints, suggestions coming out of the Kremlin about possible negotiations and negotiating positions. Maybe you could elaborate about this a little bit. But before you go ahead, let me just share my own view, and hopefully somebody will contest my view. I believe that whatever other considerations there may be in the minds of the Kremlin decision makers, having been engaged in negotiations, taking wars from a state of war to peace in the Balkans in the 90s and elsewhere, I firmly believe that President Putin and his advisors will not seriously engage in any kind of meaningful negotiations until they know the exact outcome of the US presidential elections. In other words, I think for the remainder of this year, it is, and I hope I'm wrong, I think it is an illusion to believe that we could seriously listen to Russian proposals, because I think they are not meant in earnest. But you tell us what's the truth.
So first of all, yes, what we believe, and a lot in Ukraine, that what today Russia suggests is not the peace, but occupation. And occupation is not peace. It's just a different way of waging the war. And within the Reckoning Project, we're documenting incredible atrocities which are still going on the occupied territories. And it's not like that the Ukrainians are stubborn. We just really do not see any particular hints, especially within the last months, when we see the most sophisticated weapon like Kinzhal supersonic missile be sent to Kiev like never before in history. But before that, I also should say, of course, as a journalist, after the articles appeared, I referred to my Russian sources, Russian analysts, and we were puzzled because what they are saying, they're talking to the Russian generals, they are rather ecstatic, and they're thinking at this moment they're winning the war. And we really had the reasons seriously to believe, of course I'm cautious without sources, that particular push was the part of the strategy to make the world think maybe it is a time, so we would slow down the support and we would exhaust Ukrainian army more, and then we would become stronger. Moreover, and fitting to this discussion, just yesterday I've been on a different event and I had a chance to talk to a senior Jordanian representative who just spoken at the embassy with a Russian diplomat, who really told him, and I would dare to quote, that he said that on October 7th, we were also celebrating the birth of the New World Order. We believe it was born after we invaded Kiev, but it took us too long, and now we're kind of celebrating that things are changing. Therefore, I should say that, first of all, there are no signs. If you really talk to the Russian sources, they say something very different. They clearly say that their plans are different. But returning to the title of discussion, that's why I also think that Ukraine is instrumental in, it's not like only with Ukraine. Ukraine is the tool to look for fair global order. Within the Reckoning Project, we're documenting war crimes, and part of our team, they are of Syrian origin. And Janindi Giovanni is here. She looked at different wars, happening in the Balkans, elsewhere. And we've seen that we're trying to, in fact, solve the mistakes of impunity of the previous wars in Chechnya, in Syria, but not just solve, but really maybe to prevent. We really are very grateful for Swedish government for supporting one of our projects on indoctrination of the children. But I think that Ukraine, this very fast trial, not warrant, at least warrant by the ICC on the deportation of the children, actually showed that international institutions can be capable if they want, and maybe we can prevent something. So just one quote, and we can speak longer about the rest of the world, but I'm working now on a different piece and a big story on the occupation of the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power station. And we figure out, talking to a lot of people who've been tortured, who've been dead, employees, that there is no mechanism to punish those who occupied nuclear power station. So far, in international law, it's like the very same thing. But it's one of the most dangerous things to keep the whole town and the whole nuclear power station as a hostage. So Ukraine should be this part of the solution. If we change something within what we see now, that would be more fair global order when one country won't dare to take a hostage and occupy the biggest nuclear power station in Europe. And that's where I'm speaking about very, very practical things, not about the just words.
Thank you very much. I remember about a decade ago, just before the events of Maidan and then the annexation of Crimea in the spring of 2014, my team and I, at the Munich Security Conference, we published a volume titled, and that tells you that we're really living now in a different world. The volume was titled Towards Mutual Security, with contributions from Russian officials and professors and think tank Americans, etc., etc. Of course, this dream of mutual security, of a Euro-Atlantic world at peace with itself and the neighbors, has gone up the chimney or out the window, whatever picture one wants to use. Let me turn to the representative of the Ukrainian parliament, Lesia. Some reports have been suggesting that Ukraine is beginning to tire of this war. It's now been almost 2 years of a more or less full-scale military effort. Other reports are suggesting that no, the members of the Ukrainian parliament insist on achieving the kinds of goals which President Zelensky has set out, including with regard to Crimea, achieving the return of the occupied territories in their totality, etc., etc. So maybe you could share a few words about what the mood among the members of the parliament is, who at some point there will be elections and they want to be re-elected. So what's the spirit there? And the other question I wanted to throw out to you is, how do Ukrainians feel, Ukrainian politicians feel about the really very fundamental change which you've been forced to make in recent years due to the Russian aggression? I remember a decade ago, Ukrainians liked to participate in discussions maybe we should be a little bit like Finland. We should be like a bridge between the West and the East. And even Henry Kissinger had this vision. He changed his view more recently, before his passing away last November. So now, of course, you changed the constitution. You are now working full speed to make it into NATO at the earliest option, starting the membership process with the European Union. How are Ukrainians digesting this? This is a major change, which will lead Ukraine, regardless of when the war ends and how it ends, into a totally different world from the one that it used to be in the last 30, 50, 60 years. So you have the floor.
Thank you. Well, I will never tire of saying that this war that is happening in Ukraine right now, in Europe right now, it's not 2 years, it's 10 years.
Yeah.
We will be marking 10 years this February. And it's very important to understand that what has started in 2014 has not ended yet. So this also answers the questions, are we tired? A decade is a very long time. And for now, even if it's a tiredness, we have grown very much used to it. It's become a way of life. I mean, we know we have an aggressive neighbor. We know for 2 years now that we don't get a full night's sleep because of the aerial attacks and of the air raids. And this is our reality. I mean, we don't have a different reality. We don't have a different Ukraine. And we stay strong and we stay fighting. And we are extremely grateful to Sweden and all of our other partners who are very conscious of that and who have also learned the lessons of 2014, 2022 and realized that there is no room for tiredness anymore. There's only room for fighting back and fighting back strong. And it's only with President Zelensky's peace plan, it's only with the action plan to regain the territories that we get the guarantees of the non-repetition of aggression, not just in Ukraine. Nataliya said it very rightly, but in the rest of the world. We don't want, after all, other leaders, totalitarian regime, authoritarian regimes across the world to suddenly start getting inspired and following in Putin's footsteps. And basically, this is what's on the balance right now, on the balance of global power and on the balance of global justice. Which way will the world stir? So this is how Ukrainians also see the future, this new future, this new world which is getting formed. We want to live, as I guess any member of the global community these days wants to live in a peaceful, in a secure and stable community, and preferably global community where neighbors respect each other's borders, where there is a respect for human rights, where there is a respect for basic human principles and values. To do that means forging alliances of like-minded states, the EU, NATO, for example. And you ask about also the mood on the ground within not just Parliament, I guess, but also among the people whom Parliament represents. And if you see the latest polls, the numbers have skyrocketed since 2022 in terms of the support of Ukraine's accession to the EU and Ukraine's accession to NATO. I don't remember the numbers off the top of my head, but they are close to 90%. So it's 85, 84% for EU, I think, and maybe a little bit less for NATO. But anyway, this is a tremendous, a tectonic shift from even the opinion polls which were conducted closer to 2014, 2015. So this gives you the meaning that the population of Ukraine is ready for that new world order, and we don't have another option. And of course, with the example of Sweden and Finland, who are who are members now and who were on the accession path, very quickly realizing that there's a real threat, the population in Ukraine also has no illusions anymore that the threat comes from the neighbor who has invaded us, not from the neighbors who are part of an alliance, which possibly can also provide a form of concrete protection. But with this, I would like to also draw on the title of our discussion, the global order, and that it's only possible with Ukraine. And Excellency, policy, you have rightly said that Sweden sees Ukraine as part of its foreign policy strategy. But I think there is more to that. There's more to Ukraine just becoming a member of the EU or a member of NATO. Ukraine plays and is a key to solving many challenges across the majority of the world. What we used to be calling the global south, and now we call the majority of the world, Ukraine can solve many, many issues of the countries in Africa, in Asia, Middle East, South America, security issues. It is with the aid of Ukraine's special forces that the Wagner Group's influence in Sudan was very recently overcome. And it's been a success operation covered in the news and the media and on CNN, BBC, everywhere across the world. And we have these kind of security partnerships which can be built up with the Ukrainian recent military know-how, with the Ukrainian military technology sector being on the rise and on the development. And that military technology particularly is the drones which can so easily be then adapted again for another challenge on the African continent, for example, which is the farming challenge. So the military drones get easily transformed into civilian drones, which suddenly get to deliver humanitarian aid to hard-to-reach areas, which suddenly get to be monitoring tools for fields and solving issues in the agricultural sector, which can monitor animal migration, border migration. The other big topic is medical aid and healthcare, again, in the majority of the world and in the countries which have difficulties with that. The solution, again, lies in Ukraine. And the reason for that is because in Ukraine, a lot of the students from Africa, from India, were studying and are still studying. In 2022, before the war broke out, I think there was something like 100,000 students from the majority of the world, from the global south, who were studying in Ukraine. Like, majority of these students were doing medical degrees. So for them, in those countries, to buy from Ukrainian pharmaceutical companies, it's a no-brainer. They know the protocols, they know how to use it. And that solves, again, a burning issue on the ground there. The investing into education, into Ukraine's sector of education, would also solve the education issues in the majority of the world. And with that, I think that as Ukraine is on the accession path, it's really critical for the EU to rethink its structures and its investments. You have African departments, you have Ukrainian and Eastern Europe departments, and they are not interlinked. And they should be, because Ukraine really is the key and the bridge that could forge new alliances and create a new world order, not just based, as you have rightly said, on security issues. That's the core to it, I agree. But then based on new opportunities, creative opportunities, development opportunities.
We're going to be opening up this discussion, so if you want to raise a question or add a comment, feel free. But let me just do one quick second round. Swedish Foreign Minister Tobias, let's be realistic. Some people, some of my Ukrainian friends, seem to entertain the dream that it's going to be a quick run and we'll be in the EU in no time at all. From a Swedish point of view, what's your best guess how long it takes, even if everything goes well on both sides, the EU and the candidate Ukraine working full speed on the membership process? Tell us a little bit how you interpret the goal and its achievability.
Well, it might be sooner than you think, to start with. And I think that we should be realistic optimists, as one says. First of all, it is remarkable how much reform that Ukraine has undertaken under wartime conditions. That, first of all, has to be acknowledged. There are countries who have waited a long period, you say. You don't say it, but people say, for entering the European Union. but very few has been able to do so much in such a short period of time. And that bodes very well for the future, I have to say. I'm not prepared now to set one date or say this year, because this is after all, it takes two to tango, and both the EU and Ukraine has to move on this. But I think that the decision, as I said in my introduction, was a historic one, and that we will be able to finish that at such a short pace bodes very well again. The difficulty, I think, we should understand lies in two things. Ukraine has to reform, of course, when it comes to questions regarding corruption, etc., which has to be weeded out. And the policy, the wise policy of President Zelensky, which is now underway, shows that this is taken very seriously in Kiev. The EU, and you were onto this, of course, Lisa, in what you said, the EU has to understand that some things also have to change, most notably questions regarding agricultural policy. It won't be possible for the European Union to take on and take in Ukraine without reforming certain policies. But this is something which was deliberated on when you made the decision to take on Ukraine. And I think that the political leaders are in the mindset on the right path. We have, however, also to convince the electorates of the European Union about this move. That's the big part that lies ahead. So, without taking too much time, I think we have outlined the things.
It's an important point. Thanks a lot. To Nataliya, please.
So, as it's said in the Alice Wonderland, it takes all the running. It takes for us all the running you can to keep in the same place, to stay in the same place. And I think it's partially underestimated how much effort Ukraine is doing every single day to be where you are, because sometimes I think at this stage, 2 years after the war, it's sometimes taken for granted. However, as the same book says, if you want to get somewhere else, you must run at least twice as fast. And we also understand it. But I also don't really, of course, don't believe fully that it's possible without the support. In the article you mentioned recently, the editors asked me, the question isn't to see till when Ukraine would ask for help. And of course, it's not nice to ask for the help. People, it's about your dignity. You don't want. But my answer is, I feel it's my duty because I see how this help helps. One patriot saves the quarter of Kiev. And it doesn't matter how humiliating for me it would be. I would beg for it. And I would beg for support. And I would explain why this support is working. I think you ask the question when. I often answer the very similar way in the question, when would be the Ukrainian victory? And I said, when Ukraine gets what it's needed for this victory. The very same would be about the EU accession. A lot depends on Ukraine. So, of course, I think a lot of homework, and we are there. We Ukrainian journalists, civil society are there. But, of course, some things are necessary. And such things like, for instance, you mentioned agriculture. We understand that Ukraine is already moving slowly to some of the markets, even during the war. And it's a good testing. So we're really testing. That's why, for us, it's important to understand what would be reformed and how to do that. And one thing as well, you mentioned, because, I could not react, because for the decade, it's already for a decade, I've been, observing closely all the peace process after the Minsk agreement. And this term, Finlandization, was always there. We dislike that term. Now we love this term. Finlandization of Ukraine, of course. Let's get into NATO. That's it. But finalizing with the title of the discussion, I this year also hosted the group of the senior intellectuals and journalists from all over the world, from Asia, Africa, Latin America. And all for them, what was very important to see how the smaller country can defend itself from the mighty power. And when we discuss what is a guarantee for Ukraine of the peace, it seems like it should be a genuine guarantee. Now then you start to think, what is this genuine guarantee? And as long as you start to speak, you understand you're inventing the wheel, because it's actually NATO for Ukraine, because anything else it would be just like something doing the same but with a different name. So I think for us it's important, but for the globe it's important to have kind of a structure in which, if you are not a member of an alliance, a small country could be defended, and that we won't live in the rule of the strong, that we would still preserve the world where there is some rule-based order.
One last question before we open up to you, Licia. One can believe, and I certainly believe, that when we look back over these last 10 years, one error that was committed by us Europeans in trying to manage and control and change the outcome of the illegal annexation of Crimea and the Donbass events in 2014. One error, in my estimation, was that we allowed diplomatic efforts, Minsk, to be conducted without the active and leading participation of the United States. I think it's one of my conclusions. Nothing is going to happen seriously if we don't have the active participation, which fortunately you have had during the Biden administration. So my question is this. Let's assume the worst case happens and our friend Donald gets himself reelected. The outcome of the Iowa caucus a day ago was not exactly against Donald Trump. That doesn't mean a lot at this moment, but it makes the possible Trump victory not, a distant possibility. It is a real possibility. So how do Ukrainians think, Ukrainian parliamentarians, Ukrainian leaders, think about the eventuality if we wake up next November and if Donald Trump were elected president and would repeat the kinds of remarks he's known for about doubts about America's role in NATO. He's also said it would take him a day to solve the Ukrainian war, etc. So how are we going to handle this entire issue? How are we going to proceed towards a fair global order if the United States government decides to opt out of this Ukraine supporting process?
It's a tough question, and to be honest, I really don't like it because it entails a lot of ifs.
Of course.
And a lot of uncertainties.
Yeah.
And the main uncertainty is Donald Trump himself.
Right.
Because we do not know how he will act and what he will say if he gets if he gets elected, right? He might have a change of heart. It will all depend on the team that he puts in place, his foreign affairs team. As we remember, during his past presidency, actually, the amount of weapons that Ukraine and military aid that Ukraine was getting from the United States wasn't that bad. It was
Right.
better than during the Obama administration. And also, it's not during the Trump presidency that Putin attacked Ukraine. The first or the second time. So there you go. There's things to consider, but of course this is part of the wishful thinking of me as a Ukrainian, hoping that things will turn out for the best and that reason will prevail. I like Nataliya's quote for this case scenario. This is where you have to start running much faster just to stay, and much harder just to stay in that one place. And I think this is what this is what Ukraine will have to be doing, and already needs to be doing when it comes to U.S. policies and U.S. politics. And the strategy which Ukraine is espousing right now is to have the connections to both parties and to work with especially the congressmen who are not so keen on Ukraine. The dialogues, the talks, they need to be there, and we are also counting on our other partners, our European partners, our global partners, to do the talking with us. Not for us, but with us, in shaping the understanding that Ukraine is critical to global security and to the global order as it stands today. As to the suggestion that Donald Trump has made that he will solve the war in one day, another wishful thinking that us Ukrainians have is that, of course, if he calls up Putin saying that, look, if you don't end the war, you don't pull out from Ukraine, then we will give Ukraine everything they ask for and even more, and will condone and allow the attacks inside of Russia, then okay, that's fine. And if we get to attack then inside of Russia, deep inside, and go in full on with all the weapons and the military might of the US, okay, that's fine, let it be that. But that's another wishful thinking from our part.
So now we take question. If you could please ask one brief question, please no long speeches, because we only have like 20 minutes for this. And if you could also please identify yourself, because not everybody knows everybody else in the room. We will start with the lady in the front.
Hi, I'm Janine DiGiovanni, and I'm the executive director of the Reckoning Project. Nataliya and I founded it.
Yeah.
We're very proud of the work we do, which is collecting testimonies for war crimes. But I have a very pragmatic question for you. I've just come from America. I'm half American. Reading what is happening there, and with Iowa, it looks pretty predictable that Trump will get in, unless there is a miracle. The politicians and the diplomats, I'd like to ask you very pragmatically what we can do as civil society. Because this is, I feel like we're looking at an asteroid about to hit, and we're all saying, oh my God, what can I do? But there must be something that we can do to activate civil society. You just said working with the congressmen, perhaps, that are not supportive of Ukraine. But what else could we do? What is your advice to us? And thank you, by the way, both the German and Swedish governments support the Reckoning Project, so we're very grateful.
Can I, before the panel responds, I served for 6 years as ambassador in the US, and I remember one thing. When Donald Trump was elected for the first time, my own government, I had long left the US at that time, but my own government had made the mistake of not sufficiently being in touch with the Trump team. So when Trump came into the White House, we practically knew nobody. Not at the level of the secretaries, not at the level of the cabinet officers. So we had to do a catch-up thing. So I think what Lesya just said is very smart. Working, even if you don't like them, working with Republican senators, congressmen, intellectual partners or supporters of Donald Trump, not ignoring them, but trying to explain to them why Ukraine is important for the United States and for global order. But I don't want to preempt you guys, so maybe we start with the foreign minister again.
Well, thank you very much. I think that Lisa really made a very good point also, which we have to take into account. And I keep repeating that we are not in charge of who the American people puts in the White House. That's up to the American people. We don't want people to interfere with Swedish elections or Ukrainian elections. So we simply have to accept what's given us and work with that. But having said, and also it's a bit dangerous, for politicians to give advice to civil society. It's usually the other way around. But one thing I would like to point to is the need to show the American people the appreciation that we feel in the European Union. I'm not talking about Ukraine now, I'm talking about the European Union for what the US has really done in supporting Ukraine. I'm doing this constantly when I appear on TV shows, be it Morning Yo or whatever. I keep repeating that this is very important. It's equally important to show that without the EU macro-financial support to Ukraine, Ukraine couldn't have continued to exist as a state, paying its civil servants, paying schools, paying childcare, etc., or retirement funds. So we have to show this, and also that we are stepping up on military support. All these things have to be presented to the American people. And there I think that we do have a gap between what is perceived and what is the actual reality. That's my advice to civil society.
Next question, gentleman over there.
A question to Mr. Billström. Your government has recently
Who are you?
I'm sorry, Peter Zalmaev, Premier TV channel, Ukraine.
Okay.
Your government has recently said that it has to start cranking and getting ready for a potential Russian aggression. And it follows on the heels of similar statements by Baltic leaders, the leaders of Finland. How acute is this threat? Is it connected with the fact that Sweden still has not joined NATO? And if you are contemplating this aggression, what form of it do you expect? Will it be a hybrid one, or do you think it will be an outright military aggression? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'll give a very brief answer. First of all, what has been said in Sweden is that we have to understand that we live in a dangerous world. And you don't take out a fire insurance because you want things to start burning. You do it to be insured in case of. This comment which you're referring to was made in the question of civil protection, where we incidentally have a lot to learn from Ukraine. And we have said that we need to improve on this, and we have to do it because there might be a situation where war will arrive on our doorstep. And the events in Ukraine shows that this is a possibility. We have been saying this for 2 years now, that war is back in Europe. So actually the statement isn't a new one as such. The reason why it was, I think, caused such a stir was because people misinterpreted it in the way that they perceived that the war was immediate, or the war threat is immediate. That is not the case. What we have to think about is the risk, the higher risk of war, which is now perceived in our region. And this is something where both Sweden, Germany, France, and all the states of the European Union has to think about this in a different way prior than to the outbreak of the war in Ukraine. That's my short answer. Thank you.
We'll go to the lady in second row and then to the gentleman in the corner here.
Thanks a lot. My name is Olana Pavlenko. I'm from Dixie Group. This is Ukrainian think tank which works on energy issues. Actually, my question to the minister, you very much follow also the same messages which we heard from Defense Minister Grant Shapps, who made a speech a few days ago that Great Britain should be prepared for the rising threats in the future. And my question would be, if you all share this vision that the threats will rise for the next 5 years, where Ukraine's place would be there? And will you see Ukraine's place inside NATO, or we will still be outside and fighting by ourselves? So what would be this military or, I don't know, defense scenario or architecture in the next 5 years? And very small comments regarding what Nataliya said about nuclear power plants, because we also were working on this. Theoretically, IAEA, International Atomic Energy Agency, should be the agency who should shout internationally at the UN level on what's happening there. And then they never did this, despite they are in Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plants, they located there, but they just report, nothing serious. And maybe there is a question with our UN institutions and agencies as well. Maybe we should also think about to have a fair global order through changing our international institutions and organizations, and start doing this now, not just discussing this. Thanks.
Okay, I think that's a question for the entire panel. I don't know who wishes to start, but maybe you were the first.
Yeah, I'll just deal with some of the items, and then we can have a broader discussion, I think. Well, first of all, just to make it clear, it wouldn't really be prudent for a country which is standing in the hallway of NATO to make too many comments about who's going to be inside or outside of the organization. But I'll limit myself to the following. We are, of course, in favor of the open door policy, because the open door policy is what brought Sweden to the doorstep and soon over the threshold into NATO. And this is where I think that we stand on this question. As for where Ukraine is, I think that we have to gear up. We have to increase production. We have to do it jointly with Ukraine. That was a message when President Zelensky visited Sweden earlier in August last year, that you are prepared to enter into cooperations, to joint ventures on military production. That's also something which we have to take into account, bringing Ukraine closer also to the military industry of the European Union. And finally, I speak from time to time with the Director General of the EIAR, the agency responsible for nuclear safety. I think that Mr. Gossi is doing a great job, but he needs more support from the world community in the case of Zaporizhzhia, and we are definitely prepared to give him that.
What kind of support, sorry, if I may, Excellency, what kind of support you say?
First of all, the immediate one, namely to see to it that they have access, that they can actually fulfill their mandate, which is laid down in the constitution of the agency. And secondly, of course, we have to think about the end of the war. The reason why Zaporizhzhia was occupied in the first place by Russia is most likely because it is so valuable to the energy production. So that has to be brought into the question of a peace plan by President Zelensky as well. We should never forget that.
But what is critical to understand, and there are things just to fix, we all under impression that if the EAIA is there, maybe they observe everything. But for instance, they do not record the fact that, for instance, employees would be killed and tortured. It's not in their mandate. So they look just on the technical parts about nuclear. And everybody under the impression that if they're there and the person is killed and the staff is taken hostages, it can't be that they don't mention. But they don't do it that. So it's something wrecked in the whole system. At the same time, we do have Rosatom, the incredible monopolies globally, and of course Ukrainians wouldn't speak about sanctions against Rosatom because the world depends on the nuclear. It's hardly possible. However, that there are less possibilities to sanction it to extent we want, but there are different ideas. We can sanction particular companies. We can prevent Rosatom to build a new station, to do something in 5 years, or for instance have the delayed sanctions that if we are afraid to do it today, let's be ready and do that something in 5 years, because if the company in charge is doing that, like being partially responsible for murdering and killing the people. So there are lots of things still to do.
Can I just comment on that also? So on just a quick clarification. So we actually need support as Ukraine to help the International Atomic Energy Association do their work. And what Nataliya said is maybe there's a need for a change of mechanism. For example, to pair them up with human rights organizations that would be going in there and having access there to monitor the rest of the situation. And this links to Olena's question about the world order as it stands today and whether there is a need of revamping of the institutions, including the UN. And we have done a great deal of that in the Ukrainian parliament. I myself was a part of the group who was and still is advocating for reform of the UN, which stays silent on a lot of the issues, including the Rosatom issues. And on the Rosatom issues, Ukraine does not stay silent for sure. In parliament, we even have draft resolutions on the sanctioning of the Rosatom and on the calling of the international community on the sanctioning of the Rosatom. And this is the right way to do it, because this is a collective movement, not even a movement, but a collective fight for a secure world. And the reason this situation of the Russian aggression and of this global insecurity in which we collectively are as a global community in today is because too much of the world's resources depended on Russia. Too many countries allowed themselves willfully and in full awareness to be dependent on Russia for energy and for other goods necessary for economic development.
I think we have time for one last question.
Yeah, Anders Åslund, Georgetown University. Thank you very much. First, I have a question about fighter planes. Minister Billström, as a Swedish citizen, I'm very happy to see that Sweden has delivered so much of good arms to Ukraine. But Sweden also has Gripen, a good fighter plane, and could send 20 Gripen to Ukraine. Is this going to happen? If so, under what conditions? And to Lesbian, Nataliya, Denmark, Norway, and the Netherlands have all promised to deliver F-16 to Ukraine. When do you think you will get them? Thank you.
Okay. Minister first.
Thank you very much. Yes, we, as you say, have a strong Air Force, and we're also part of the F-16 coalition, albeit we don't have F-16, we're also in a position to finance this. The Prime Minister of Sweden has been very clear when he has been asked the question that we are not ruling anything out, but all such decisions have to be contemplated after Sweden has joined NATO. We have to make this, a condition, because we also have to think about the safety of Sweden. But again, we do not rule anything out. Thank you.
Okay. Nataliya?
That won't be the answer to us. I said, we won't be shy to ask and ask and ask.
Very last question.
Short comment, if I may, to the
There is a mic, yeah.
short comment to the nuclear issues. I had a wonderful chat yesterday with Mikhailo Onchar, and he brought to my attention one important fact, which is not on the on the agenda of different international institutions. Rosatom as a company is a unique company. It unites both civil engineering and military in one company. In most of the companies, civil nuclear power plants and civil nuclear materials are produced by one company and nuclear by another one. Rosatom has the structure where the military part is way bigger than the civil one, and it has to be taken care. So basically, the procurement of the fuel from Rosatom means that basically we finance the military production of their military stuff, and that has to be taken into consideration, and Rosatom has to be sanctioned.
Just one sentence. Rosatom now is an instrument also to avoid sanctions, because
Of
they
what? Of what?
avoid sanctions. They increase their. If you look at their strategy, they take additional types of activities to work with microchips and other stuff. And they bought a uranium field in Kazakhstan. They bought some companies on microchips in South Korea. So you will see this company which will replace all those companies which are sanctioned. And I mean, this strategy cannot be ignored. Thanks.
Okay, thank you very much. I'm sure we could continue for another hour, but Svetlana tells me that we need to come to a close. Let me just add one word as a long-time diplomat. Let me just add one word about global order, about the United Nations, about international institutions. I'm sorry to say we have a certain set of international institutions, and efforts have been made for many years to change them, enlarging the Security Council of the United Nations. It's been going on for 4 or 5 decades without much success so far. And I have to say, I hope I'm not disappointing anyone, the current situation with the confrontation between the US on one hand, Russia and China on the other hand, is not very likely to produce an agreement which would be essential among the permanent members of the Security to change UN institutions generally, or the Security Council in particular. And the same, of course, is true for the agency in Vienna. It's good that we have it. Changing it, enlarging their powers, is going to be very, very tough. So we need to be realistic. Thank you very much. Wonderful panel. And thank you for participating. And I think we should all leave this room with the understanding that, yes, indeed, if we want to produce a more peaceful, more functional, and fairer international order, it's not going to happen without peace in and for Ukraine. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.